When Karen banned my nephew from using the community pool, I didn't even know her name. 6 months later, I knew her bank account numbers and her entire corruption history. That transformation from clueless neighbor to forensic investigator happened because Karen Mitchell made one critical mistake. She picked a fight with a retired construction lawyer who'd spent 20 years unraveling fraud schemes and had absolutely nothing left to lose after losing his wife. 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, standing in my doorway in my bathrobe, steam rising from my coffee mug, facing two very confused police officers and one very smug woman in tennis whites. The smell of fresh coffee mixing with Karen's overwhelming. Vanilla perfume should have been my first warning that this wasn't just about pool rules anymore. What would you do if your HOA Karen tried to weaponize the police against you? Drop your worst HOA story in the comments below. Before we dive in, where are you watching from? I'm curious how many of you are dealing with your own neighborhood tyrants right now. My name is Dave Martinez, and 8 months ago I thought I was moving to paradise. Willowbrook Estates. $127 pristine homes built between 2019 and 2021, complete. With a $400,000 Sense community pool that sparkled like a jewel in the morning sun, I paid premium for the corner lot with the pool view. $750 K? When comparable houses were going for $650? K worth every penny, I thought, especially after watching my wife Sarah battle cancer for 3 years. Sarah, deedless October. The house we'd shared for 22 years felt like a museum of memories. So I packed up and moved to Willowbrook to start fresh. Retired from construction law after 2 decades of fighting contractor fraud. Figured I'd earn some peace and quiet. Every morning, I'd sit in my kitchen with my coffee, watching the sunrise reflect off that pool's surface, listening to the early lap swimmers cut through the water with their rhythmic strokes. It was meditation in motion, exactly what my grief. Counselor had recommended. That's when I first noticed her. Karen Mitchell, 48 real estate agent, HOA vice president, owner of the model home that anchored our little community. Always in designer athleisure, blonde highlights perfectly maintained, carrying that damn binder everywhere. Like she was running a Fortune 500 company instead of a suburban homeowners association. She was married to City Councilman Brad Mitchell, which meant she knew all the right people and never let anyone forget it. The first few months were blissfully Krenry. Kept to myself, followed every rule to the letter, and slowly started feeling human again. Then summer arrived, and with it my nephew, Miguel. Miguel's 16, my brother's kid from Phoenix, smart as a whip, heading to engineering school in the fall, and the closest thing to a son I'll ever have. Sarah and I never had kids, too busy with careers, then too focused on our treatment. Miguel was spending his summer with me, working at the local hardware store and keeping his old uncle company. The trouble started on a Tuesday in June. Miguel had invited 2 friends from his summer job over for a pool day. Nice kids. Polite. The kind who actually say, "Thank you, Mr. Martinez," without being prompted. We're talking about maybe 90 minutes. Of teenage laughter and the occasional splat. That's when Karen appeared poolside with her clipboard like some kind of HOA Grim Reaper. The chlorine smell mixed with her overwhelming vanilla perfume created this nauseating cloud. As she approached our little group, she announced loud enough for the entire pool area to hear, "I need to see guest passes for these young men." Guest passes? I'd been living there for 8 months and had never heard of guest passes. Their family, I explained, keeping my voice level. This is Miguel, my nephew, and these are his friends from work. Karen's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Rules are rules, Mr. Martinez. HOA bylaws clearly state that excessive guest usage, that's more ethin, 2 guests per household per week, requires pre-registration and approved guest passes. I offered to register the boys as extended visitors. Seemed reasonable enough, but Karen wasn't interested in reasonable. No exceptions, she declared, consulting her clipboard like it contained the 10 Commandments. Pool privileges are immediately suspended for Lot 47 pending compliance review. The creak of pool chairs as other residents suddenly found their phones fascinating. The musty smell of fear. Nobody wanted to be Karen's next target. Miguel and his friends quietly gathered their towels, embarrassed and confused. That night, Karen posted an official notice on the community board. Pool privileges suspended for Lot 47 pending compliance review. She even made an announcement at the weekly HOA meeting emphasizing my failure to follow established protocols, with just enough theatrical disappointment to make it clear who the villain was supposed to be. Sitting in that basement community center surrounded by nervous neighbors send the smell of old coffee, I realized this wasn't about pool rules. This was about power, control, and putting the newcomer in his place. Karen had just made her first mistake. She'd picked a fight with someone who'd spent 20 years dealing with bullies who hid behind contracts and fine print. Time to dust off some old skills. Karen didn't waste time escalating. 3 days after the pool incident, I found an official letter in my mailbox. Certified mail, no less. She'd scheduled a compliance hearing with the HOA board, giving me exactly 48 hours notice. The hearing was set for Thursday at 7 p.m. Thursday was Sarah's birthday. I'd planned to visit her grave, maybe bring those sunflowers she loved, spend some quiet time talking to her about Miguel and how proud she'd be of the young man he was becoming. The letter cited multiple violations I'd apparently missed. Trash cans visible from the street, they weren't. Lawn height exceeding 3.5 and I'd measured it myself at 3.2, and my personal favorite, failure to maintain community harmony through appropriate guest management. That night, I did what any good lawyer does when facing a hostile opponent. I read the fine print. Every page of the HOA documents I'd signed at closing, plus the original community charter. 20 years of construction law teaches you that the devil's always in the details, and Karen had just handed me a roadmap to her weaknesses. Buried on page 47 of the charter, I found gold. Reasonable accommodation shall be provided for family gatherings and multi-generational household activities. Karen's guest policy directly violated the foundational document she claimed to be enforcing. Even better, her official letter violated at least 3 procedural requirements: insufficient notice period, failure to specify which bylaw was allegedly violated, and scheduling during what any reasonable person would consider a family emergency time frame. Thursday evening, I walked into Karen's dining room because apparently we were holding official hobusiness in her personal residence. Carrying a manila folder with every relevant document highlighted and tabbed, the smell of her lavender air freshener was so overwhelming. I wondered if she was trying to cover up something else. Maybe the stench of corruption has a smell. The board looked uncomfortable. Jim Walsh, the president and a recently retired high school teacher, kept shifting. In his chair, Maria Santos, our treasurer and a non-ANSYS accountant, took notes with the intensity of someone documenting Yavins. Karen's husband, Brad, wasn't there. He's probably smart enough to maintain plausible deniability. Karen opened with a PowerPoint presentation. I'm not kidding. She had actual slides about maintaining community standards and preserving property values. Every third slide had a thinly veiled reference to certain residents who didn't understand our way of life. The sound of her manicured nails tapping against the mahogany table created this irritating rhythm that matched her condescending tone perfectly. When she finished her performance, I quietly stood up and began laying out documents. Before we proceed, I said I'd like to point out several procedural violations in tonight's hearing. First, HOA business cannot be conducted in a board members' private residence without prior community notice. Second, the 48-hour notice period violates our bylaws, requiring 7 days minimum notice for compliance hearings. Third, the alleged violations cited in your letter don't correspond to any specific bylaw language. Jim Walsh perked up. Dave, are you saying this hearing isn't valid? I'm saying that if we're going to enforce rules, we should probably follow them ourselves. I opened my folder and pulled out the highlighted charter pages. According to the foundational document, we all agree to, quote, reasonable accommodation shall be provided for family gatherings and multi-generational household activities. My nephew's pool day with 2 friends falls squarely under this protection. Karen's face flushed. That language is outdated. We've since updated. It's respect, Karen. The original charter can only be modified by a community-wide vote. Has there been such a vote? Silence. Maria Santos looked up from her notes and shook her head. Here's where Karen made her critical error. Instead of acknowledging the procedural issues and scheduling a proper hearing, she pivoted to personal attack. Maybe Mr. Martinez is having trouble adjusting to community life after his recent loss? Perhaps the stress of learning new rules is overwhelming. The room went dead quiet. Even Karen's supporters looked uncomfortable. I could hear the air conditioning unit cycling on in the distance. I gathered my documents slowly, deliberately. Thank you. All for your time. I'll be reviewing our community charter more thoroughly, and we'll be in touch. The vote was 42 to uphold the pool ban, with Jim Walsh and Maria Santos dissenting. But something had shifted. Karen had revealed her true colors, and the board had seen a glimpse of what they were really dealing with. That night, I opened my laptop and began the kind of deep research I hadn't done since my last major construction fraud case. HOA formation documents, municipal filings, Karen's real estate transaction history. Everything was public record if you knew where to look. By 2 a.m., I'd found the first thread. Karen Mitchell really had been the exclusive sales agent during Willowbrook's construction phase. Exclusive arrangements like that usually came with incentives. Time to see exactly what those incentives had been. Karen's next move came faster than I expected. Within a week, she'd organized what she called a neighborhood watch patrol. 3 residents with clipboards and cameras documenting every minor deviation from HOA rules throughout the community. Suddenly, people were getting violation notices for things that had been ignored for years, and basketball hoops stored in garages, but visible through windows. Garden gnomes, exceeding the 2 decoration limit. Christmas lights still up in July, but I was getting special attention. Daily drive-bys, photographs of my property from multiple angles, printed warnings left under. The windshield wipers of anyone who visited me. Miguel started joking that Karen was stalking us, but I could see it was wearing on him. 16-year-old shouldn't have to worry about getting his uncle in trouble just by existing. The harassment campaign was having its intended effect on the community, too. Fear was spreading like a virus. Neighbors who used to wave from their driveway suddenly found their phones fascinating when I walked by. The divide was becoming visible. Newer residents rallying behind Karen's standards, while the original homeowners whispered their concerns in grocery store aisles. That's when Maria Santos approached me after one of my morning walks. She's a small woman with steel in her spine, the kind of accountant who could spot a discrepancy from 3 counties away. "Dave," she said quietly, glancing around like we were planning a heist. "We need to talk. There are things about this HOA's finances that don't add up." While Karen was busy playing security guard, I was doing what construction lawyers do best. Following the money, I'd installed discrete security cameras around my property. It's perfectly legal in Texas, by the way, and began logging Karen's patrol schedule. Every drive-by, every photograph, every intimidation tactic, all time-stamped and documented. Here's a legal nugget most people don't know. HOA enforcement procedures require written warnings before penalties can be imposed. Karen's verbal harassment. An immediate pool ban violated due process requirements under state law. 1-sentence takeaway. Document everything because HOA board members can be held liable for procedural violations. I also started quietly connecting with Jim Walsh and Maria Santos. Turns out I wasn't the first resident to experience Karen's special brand of community leadership. Jim shared stories about families who'd moved away rather than deal with her harassment. Maria hinted at financial irregularities, but needed time to compile evidence. The pool incident that changed everything happened on a Friday afternoon. Miguel and his friends had waited until designated family hours to use the pool, everything by the book. They were quietly enjoying the water when Karen appeared with her clipboard and 2 patrol volunteers like some kind of HOA SWAT team. "Exit the pool immediately," she announced, her voice carrying across the water. "Lot 47 remains under pool privileges suspension." The boys complied without argument. Miguel had coached them well about not escalating conflicts, but Karen wasn't satisfied with compliance. She followed them to my house, her entourage in tow, voices rising with each step. By the time they reached my driveway, half the neighborhood was watching from windows. Karen was in full theatrical mode, gesturing wildly and talking about certain types of people who don't understand community standards. Here's where my legal training kicked in. Instead of engaging in a shouting match, I pulled out my phone and started recording. Corinne, I said calmly. The HOA's legal obligation is to provide equal access to community amenities for all residents in good standing. Can you cite the specific bylaw that justifies ongoing pool privileges suspension? She kept ranting, but now she was doing it on camera. This is about more than pool rules, Mr. Martinez. This is about people who fit our community values and people who don't. 3 neighbors merged from their houses. It's clearly disturbed by Karen's tone and the implications of her words. Mrs. Chen, from across the street, shook her head in disgust. The Johnsons, a young black couple who'd moved in last spring, exchanged knowing looks. If you can't control your guests, Karen continued, oblivious to the growing audience, maybe this community isn't right for you. I emailed the recording to the HOA board that evening with a formal complaint about harassment and discriminatory entorker. The email was professional, detailed, and documented Karen's pattern of behavior with timestamps and witness accounts. The emergency board meeting was called for the following Tuesday. Karen's defense was predictable. She was protecting the community from outside influences and property value threats. When the vote came on formal censure, it was a 33 tie, with Karen abstaining, no action taken. But something important had shifted. After the meeting, Maria Santos slipped me a manila envelope. Financial documents, she whispered. Look at the construction contracts versus actual amenity costs. Then tell me what you think. That night, I spread those documents across my dining room table and felt the familiar thrill of spotting the inconsistencies that would unravel everything. The numbers told a story Karen definitely didn't want anyone to read. Karen's next move was her nuclear option, filing a formal complaint with City Code Enforcement alleging multiple violations at my property, false accusations about unpermitted modifications and commercial activity. The complaint was filed on a Monday. The inspection was scheduled for Friday. Friday was Miguel's graduation party. I'd planned a small celebration for about 20 family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, driving in from across Texas to celebrate Miguel heading off to engineering school. Sarah would have loved seeing our family together like this, watching Miguel beam with pride as he talked about his college plans. Heron knew about the party. The whole neighborhood knew. That's exactly why she'd timed the inspection to coincide with our family gathering. At 2 p.m., just as Miguel was cutting his graduation cake, a city code enforcement truck pulled into my driveway. Behind it, Karen's car. She'd come to watch the show, expecting violations to be found in front of my entire extended family. The inspector, a weathered man named Bob, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, emerged with his clipboard and camera. Sorry to interrupt your party, sir. Got a complaint about unpermitted modifications and overcrowding violations. 20 years of construction law had prepared me for this moment. I disappeared into my house and returned with a banker's box full of documents, original architectural plans, every permit from the city, inspection certificates, even the final occupancy letter. Here's every permit and inspection report for this property, I told Bob, setting the box on my porch table. Feel free to compare the actual construction to the approved plans. Miguel, bless him, had pulled out his phone and started live streaming the entire inspection on Instagram. Guys, you're not going to believe this, he narrated to his followers. Some lady called code enforcement on my uncle's graduation party. The inspection lasted 2 hours. Bob checked electrical outlets, measured room dimensions, examined the plumbing. Fixtures even climbed into the attic to verify HVAC installation. Throughout it all, Karen hovered nearby, occasionally suggesting places he should look harder for violations. Here's another legal nugget. When someone files false code enforcement complaints, they can be held liable for the cost of unnecessary inspections. One-sentence takeaway. Frivolous complaints often backfire when the property is actually in perfect compliance. Eyes Bob worked. Neighbors started gathering. Mrs. Chen brought over lemonade for my family. The Johnsons offered their kids help cleaning up party decorations. Even some of Karen's usual supporters looked uncomfortable with the spectacle she'd created. Miguel's live stream was gaining viewers by the minute. Comments poured in from his high school friends, college classmates, even random people who'd stumbled across the stream. This lady is crazy. Read one comment. Sue her? Suggested another. The moment of truth came when Bob finished his inspection. No violations, zero. My house exceeded all code requirements, I'd made sure of. That during construction, knowing my lawyer background would make me a target for exactly this kind of harassment? Gosh. Bob looked genuinely embarrassed as he approached Karen. Ma'am, I don't know who gave you this information, but this property is in perfect compliance. It's one of the better built houses I've inspected this year. That's when Karen made her biggest mistake yet. Instead of gracefully accepting the results, she publicly argued with the inspector. You need to look harder, she insisted, her voice rising. Check the garage again. Check the pool equipment. There have to be violations. The live stream captured everything. Karen's increasingly unhinged behavior, her demands that the inspector find something, her obvious disappointment when her scheme failed. Miguel's comment section exploded with viewers sharing their own HOA horror stories. But here's what Karen didn't know. During the inspection, my construction-trained eye had noticed something that would change everything. The original architectural plans Bob was comparing to my house showed significant discrepancies with the community amenities. The pool installation specs didn't match what was actually built. The community center dimensions were wrong. The landscaping budget seemed inflated compared to what was actually installed. As our family celebration continued into the evening, despite Karen's best efforts to ruin it, Maria Santos approached me near the grill where I was flipping burgers for my cousins. Dave, she said quietly, after seeing this inspection circus, I think you need to see the rest of the financial documents. There's a smoking gun in those construction contracts that's going to blow your mind. That night, after the last family member had driven home and Miguel had fallen asleep, exhausted from his big day, I sat at my kitchen table with Maria's latest document dump. What I found made my construction lawyer blood run cold. HOA had Ben builds $2,100,000 for community amenities that actualicist. $1,400,000 to build. $700,000 had vanished into thin air, and Karen Mitchell really had been involved in every transaction. It was time to stop playing defense and go on the attack. The smoking gun was hiding in plain sight. Buried in a stack of emails Maria had been quietly saving for 3 years. I wasn't sure what I was looking at until you mentioned the construction discrepancies. Maria explained as we sat in my kitchen the next morning. Financial documents spread across the table like evidence in amateur trial. But look at this. She handed me a printed email chain between Karen and the original developer, Sunset Construction. The subject line read, Revised Community Amenity Pricing Confidential. Construction lawyer brain started connecting dots faster than a supercomputer. The original HOA budget showed $2,100,000. Zero allocated for community amenities, pool, landscaping, community center, playground. But the actual construction invoices, the ones buried in Maria's files, showed costs of only $1 million. $400,000. $700,000 gone. Here's the beautiful part, Maria continued, pulling out bank statements. Look at Karen's personal account deposits during the construction phase. Large, irregular deposits, amounts that coincidentally match the timing of HOA payments to the developer. Karen Mitchell Realty had received referral bonuses and sales incentives that were 400% above normal real estate commission rates. But the real smoking gun was an email Karen thought she deleted, where Ash explicitly discussed profit-sharing arrangements with Sunset Construction for inflated amenity budgets that would be absorbed by HOA dues over time. Here's a financial nugget. That'll make your blood boil. Developers often inflate community amenity costs and split the profits with insiders who control the approval process. One sentence takeaway. Always demand to see actual construction invoices, not just budget projections, before approving HOA. Special assessments. This wasn't just about pool access anymore. This was about systematic financial fraud that had been bleeding our community dry for 3 years. Every resident had overpaid for substandard amenities, and we were continuing to overpay. Through inflated HOA dues designed to cover the missing money. There's more, Maria said grimly. The monthly landscaping contract, the pool maintenance, even the snow removal service, they're all overpriced by 30–40%, and Karen gets kickbacks from every vendor. The pattern was clear. Karen's aggressive rule. Enforcement wasn't about maintaining standards. It was about preventing scrutiny of the financial irregularities that were making her rich. Her harassment campaign against me had escalated because my construction law background made me the one person in the community capable of unraveling her scheme. "Why didn't you bring this to the board earlier?" I asked. Maria sighed. Because Karen controls the board. Jim Walsh is honest but outnumbered. Everyone else is either afraid of her or benefiting from her connections. I needed someone with the legal expertise to understand what we were looking at. The irony was delicious. Karen's attempts to silence me had actually motivated me to investigate the exact financial corruption she was trying to hide. Her harassment campaign was evidence of obstruction, and her discriminatory enforcement patterns showed a deliberate pattern of targeting anyone who might question her authority. As a construction lawyer, I'd seen this type of fraud dozens of times. Developers and their inside conspirators inflating costs, skimming profits, then using aggressive tactics to prevent discovery. The difference was that now I wasn't being paid. To investigate, this was personal. "What's our next move?" Maria asked. I looked at the evidence spread across my table. Email admissions of profit sharing, bank records showing suspicious deposits, construction invoices proving cost inflation. A 3-year pattern of financial irregularities totaling over $700,000, 0 cents. "We're going to give the community exactly what Karen's been trying to prevent," I said. "Complete financial transparency. Every resident has the right to know where their money went and who profited from overcharging them. And if she tries to stop us," I smiled, feeling more like my old lawyer self than I had since Sarah died, "then she'll be adding obstruction of justice to fraud and embezzlement charges." Karen picked the wrong retired construction attorney to mess with. Time to build a case that would hold up in criminal court. Building a criminal fraud case requires 3 things: evidence, allies, and patience. Lucky for me, I'd spent 2 decades perfecting all 3. Step 1. Assemble the team. Maria Santos brought the financial access and insider knowledge. Jim Walsh provided board legitimacy and moral authority. I contributed 20 years of construction law expertise and an intimate knowledge of how fraud schemes operate. Our first strategy. A session happened in my living room on a Tuesday evening. Security cameras ensured privacy while we spread documents across my coffee table like generals planning a campaign. The smell of Maria's homemade tamales mixed with the tension in the room. Nothing builds conspiracy quite like comfort food. "Here's what we're dealing with," I explained, pointing to the financial timeline I'd constructed. "This isn't random theft. It's a sophisticated long-term embezzlement scheme with 3 revenue streams: inflated construction costs, overpriced service contracts, and developer kickbacks disguised as sales commissions." Jim Walsh shook his head in disbelief. "That's almost $6,000 per household." Actually, Maria corrected. "It's worse. The ongoing overcharges mean we're being robbed every month through inflated dues and service contracts. Here's a legal nugget that'll save you thousands. HOA board members have fiduciary duty to protect community financial interests, and residents have legal right to detailed financial records and independent audits. 1-sentence takeaway. If your HOA won't provide transparent financial documentation, that's probably because they're hiding something worth finding." Our strategy was multi-pronged. Criminal referral to the district attorney's office for fraud and embezzlement. Civil action to recover stolen funds plus damages. Governance reform to prevent future corruption. And most importantly, community education so residents understood their rights and could protect themselves. The key, I explain, is building an airtight case before Karen realizes what we're doing. We need to document everything, preserve all evidence, and prepare for her inevitable retaliation. Step 2, evidence preservation. I taught Maria how to use professional case management software to organize financial documents. Every suspicious transaction, every overpriced contract, every suspicious deposit, all cross-referenced and timestamped. With supporting documentation, meanwhile, Miguel had become our social media intelligence officer. that kids' digital native skills were invaluable for tracking Karen's online activities and monitoring community sentiment. Turns out Karen's social media posts about maintaining standards and problematic. Residents created a beautiful timeline of harassment that correlated perfectly with my financial discoveries. Uncle Dave Miguel said one evening while updating our digital evidence files, Karen's been posting about you on Facebook almost daily. It's basically documenting her own obstruction case. Step 3. Legal preparation. I retained Sarah Chen, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime. Not because I needed defense, because I needed someone who understood prosecution strategies and could help me present evidence in the format prosecutors prefer. This is actually quite strong, Sarah told me after reviewing our evidence package. Financial fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud, the email admissions aligner, prosecutorial gold. Add the pattern of retaliation against whistleblowers and you've got federal charges. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. We filed formal public records requests for all HOA financial documents. It's completely legal, entirely within our rights as residents. Karen would have to either comply, giving us official documentation of the fraud, or obstruct, adding criminal charges to her growing legal problems. Step 4. Community preparation. Jim Walsh used his position as presidente to schedule a special board meeting about financial transparency and community concerns. The agenda was innocuous, but the subtext was clear. We were bringing the fight into the open. I spent evenings preparing presentation materials that would make complex financial fraud accessible to residents without legal or accounting backgrounds. Charts showing where their money went. Comparisons between what they paid and what they received, simple explanations of their legal rights to financial information. The goal isn't to confuse them with technical details, I explained to our team. It's to show them how they've been robbed and what we can do about it. Maria handled the financial forensics, creating a paper trail that would make prosecutors smile. Every inflated invoice, every suspicious payment, every kickback disguised as legitimate business expense, all documented with professional accounting precision. Meanwhile, I was working on the legal framework. Texas has strong laws protecting HOA residents from financial abuse, but most people don't know their rights. I'd prepared template letters residents could use to demand financial transparency, explained their rights to independent audits, and outlined the legal remedies available for fraud victims. The beauty of our strategy was that every action was completely legal and within our rights as residents. Karen could try to retaliate, but she'd be fighting residents, exercising legitimate oversight of community finances. By the time we were ready to go public, we had enough evidence to fill a federal prosecutor's dreams and enough community support to ensure Karen couldn't silence us through intimidation. The question wasn't whether we could prove Karen was stealing. The question was how much prison time she'd get for it. Karen's desperation became visible the moment our public records requests hit her desk. Within 48 hours, she'd called an emergency board meeting to propose disruptive resident removal procedures with me as the obvious target. Her false narrative was almost impressive in its audacity. According to Karen, I was a mentally unstable widower were using my lawyer tricks to harass honest volunteers and threaten community harmony. She actually suggested that my grief over Sarah's death had made me paranoid and vindictive. The character assassination campaign spread across social media like wildfire. Fake Facebook posts claiming I was planning to sue individual residents, whisper campaigns about my unstable mental state following my wife's death. Fear-mongering suggestion showed my harassment would result in increased insurance costs for everyone. But Karen's masterstroke was the cultural dog whistles. Subtle comments about certain residents not fitting community values and the need to maintain our way of life. Never said anything explicitly discriminatory. Too smart for that. But the implications were clear to anyone listening. Here's where my legal training paid dividends. Instead of responding to the personal attacks, I continued methodical evidentially while documenting every one of Karen's statements. 20 years of construction law had taught me that bullies always escalate when their initial tactics fail, and escalation leads to mistakes. The board meeting she called was standing room only. Word had spread about the disruptive resident agenda, and everyone wanted to see the showdown. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with industrial coffee created an atmosphere thick enough to cut. With a knife, Karen's presentation included a formal proposal to implement disruptive behavior penalties. Fines up to $1,000 for residents who undermine community harmony through frivolous complaints or intimidation of volunteers. When she finished, I stood up with my manila folder. Before the board considers any penalties, I said calmly, I'd like to present some concerns about procedural violations in tonight's meeting format. I methodically outlined how Karen's proposed penalties violated due process requirements under Texas Property Code, how the emergency meeting violate bylaws requiring 7 days notice for policy changes, how the disruptive behavior language was unconstitutionally vague and could be used to silence any resident who questioned board decisions. More importantly, I continued opening my folder. I have documented evidence of a 3-year pattern of harassment directed at residents who request financial transparency. The room went dead quiet as I presented timestamped documentation of Karen's harassment campaign. Her drive-by photography sessions, her intimidation of my visitors, her attempts to weaponize code enforcement against my family gathering, Jim Walsh. And Maria Santos openly supported my position, demonstrating that the board unity Karen had counted on was fracturing. 3 other board members looked uncomfortable as they realized they were being recorded making decisions based on personal vendettas rather than community interests. That's when Karen made her critical error. Under pressure and facing exposure, she lost her composure. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she snapped. Mr. Martinez is using lawyer intimidation tactics to silence board members. We're trying to protect this community from people who don't understand our standards. I kept recording. Let her dig her own grave. After the meeting where Karen's proposals were voted down 52, she cornered me in the parking lot. What she didn't know was that my phone was still recording. Look, Dave, she said, her voice dripping. With fake concern, maybe we can work out our differences. The HOA budget has some flexibility. We could arrange for your pool maintenance to be covered, maybe help with some landscaping costs. If you could just drop these complaints and let the board handle things quietly. Attempted bribery on tape in front of witnesses. That's a generous offer, Karen, I replied carefully. But I think financial transparency benefits the entire community, not just individual residents. Her mask slipped completely. If you don't back off, you'll regret it. This community has ways of dealing with troublemakers, and my husband has friends in city government. Don't appreciate residents who waste municipal resources with frivolous complaints. Threat also on tape. The next morning, Karen filed a false police report, claiming I had threatened her during our parking lot conversation. She timed the complaint perfectly right as I was having my morning coffee, ensuring maximum neighborhood visibility when the patrol cars arrived. But Karen had finally made the mistake I'd been waiting for. She'd weaponized law enforcement based on a demonstrably false complaint, and I had audio evidence proving it. When the officers arrived at my door at 6 a.m., I was ready with my phone, my recording of the previous night's conversation. 20 years of experience dealing with people who thought connections could override evidence. Officers, I said calmly, I believe you're here about a complaint from Karen Mitchell. Before we proceed, I'd like you to hear the actual conversation she's complaining about. Karen Sover-Confines had just handed me federal charges for filing false police reports and obstruction of justice. The police officers listened to my recording with expressions that shifted from skepticism to disbelief to barely contained anger. Nothing pisses off law enforcement quite like having their resources weaponized for personal vendettas. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez told Karen when they confronted her, filing false reports is a criminal offense. We strongly advise you to reconsider any future complaints unless you have actual evidence of criminal activity. But Karen was beyond rational thought. Facing exposure of her financial crimes and the collapse of her community power base, she launched into full scorched earth mode. Her final desperation play involved filing a formal complaint with the city attorney's office, claiming I was threatening community safety and using legal intimidation to undermine legitimate governance. She attempted to freeze HOA accounts to prevent me from accessing financial records, citing ongoing legal threats as justification. When that failed, she called for emergency votes of no confidence against Jim Walsh and Maria Santos, claiming they'd been compromised by the troublemaker. Her goal was to install a compliant board before the criminal investigation could proceed. The community was fracturing along predictable lines. Newer residents, intimidated by potential legal costs and believing authorities should be respected, rallied behind Karen's narrative about protecting stability. Original homeowners, families who'd experienced her harassment firsthand, anyone concerned about financial transparency supported our transparency efforts. But the majority just wanted the conflict to end, regardless of who was right. That's when local media attention transformed our neighborhood drama into a public interest story. Channel 8 News picked up Miguel's viral live stream footage and began investigating HOA power abuse in suburban communities. Suddenly, our little Willowbrook drama weighs, representing a broader pattern of unchecked authority in residential governance. While Karen was busy with damage control interviews, I was filing a comprehensive criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. 20 years of construction law had taught me exactly how prosecutors think, and I presented our evidence in the format they prefer: timeline, financial documentation, recorded admissions, pattern of obstruction. The DA's white-collar crime unit assigned Detective Sarah Chen to investigate. Within 48 hours, she'd issued subpoenas for all HOA financial records, developer contracts, and Karen's personal banking information going back 5 years. "This is substantial," Detective Chen told me during our interview. "Financial fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and now, obstruction of justice. We're looking at potential federal charges." Karen's panic was visible to the entire community. For the first time, she faced consequences beyond neighborhood politics. Her real estate license, Wassender review. Her husband's city council position was generating negative publicity. Criminal defense attorneys don't come cheap, and her legal profits were about to be frozen as evidence. But cornered animals are dangerous. And Karen had one last card too: play property damage. My pool equipment mysteriously malfunctioned. $3,000 in damage to pumps and filtration systems. Security cameras were tampered with, though not before capturing footage of late-night visitors to my property. My home office window was broken by a stray baseball that somehow traveled 200 YD from the nearest playing field. The harassment campaign expanded to my professional reputation. Organized phone calls to my former law firm claiming I was having a mental breakdown and making threats against community members. Letters to the state bar suggesting I was using my law license to intimidate private citizens. Karen's final power play was calling for an emergency vote to dissolve the current HOA board and install a professional-aged company coincidentally owned by one of her real estate associates, but she'd made a critical error. The evidence avalanche was now too substantial to contain. Security footage captured her late-night property sabotage. Phone records documented the coordinated harassment campaign. Most damaging, Detective Chen's investigation had uncovered additional kickback schemes involving landscaping, pool maintenance, and snow removal contracts. The community education campaign we launched was working. 47 residents signed a petition supporting financial transparency. Local news coverage had educated homeowners about their rights to HOA financial information. Property law blogs and HOA reform websites were citing our case as a model for community organizing. Regional TV news picked up the story as an example of suburban corruption, featuring interviews with HOA law specialists who explained residents' rights and remedies. Miguel's documentation of Karen's behavior had spread far beyond our local community, inspiring other HOA residents to demand accountability. Is the viral aspect added pressure Karen hadn't anticipated? Her behavior was now public record, archived on social media and news websites. Any future real estate clients could Google her name and find detailed documentation of harassment, financial fraud, and abuse of authority. As Detective Chen's investigation expanded involving federal mail fraud charges, Anne realized her comfortable suburban thief was collapsing. The mandatory community meeting required by state law when criminal investigations involve HOA finances was scheduled for the following Saturday. Stakeholders would be present: residents, media, law enforcement, Karen's criminal defense attorney. and a very prepared construction lawyer with nothing left to lose and a community to protect. It was time for the final showdown. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp tension of a courthouse before a verdict. Willowbrook Elementary School Gymnasium, our community center, was too small for the crowd this story had attracted. 89 of our 127 households showed up, along with Channel 8 News, Detective Sarah Chen, Karen's criminal defense attorney, and enough social media live streams to crash the school's Wi-Fi. The smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with nervous sweat and anticipation. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows faced a table where Sharon sat with her lawyer, looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past month. Maria, Jim, and I anchored the other side, our evidence boxes stacked like legal artillery. Karen's opening move was predictable: play the victim. Her attorney had coached her well. She spoke in measured tones about being persecuted for volunteering to protect community standards and harassed by a man who can't accept legitimate authority. Mr. Martinez has used his legal background to intimidate honest volunteers, she said, avoiding eye contact with the cameras. This witch hunt is costing the community thousands in legal fees and destroying the harmony we've worked so hard to build. She painted herself as a dedicated public servant, targeted by an unstable widower, using lawyer tricks to settle personal grudges. It was a masterful performance if you ignored the mountain of evidence sitting 3 feet away. And when Karen finished, I stood up and connected my laptop to the school's projector system. 20 years of courtroom presentations had taught me that visual. Evidence trumps emotional appeals every time. Before we discuss personality conflicts, I began, let's look at some numbers. The first slide showed our community's original construction budget, $2,100,000 for amenities. The second slide showed actual construction costs, $1,400,000. The difference, $700,000, appeared in red. This represents money our community paid for amenities we never received, I explained. That's almost $6,000, 0 cents per household, that vanished during the construction phase. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Numbers don't lie, and these numbers were telling a story Karen definitely didn't want heard. The next slides documented the ongoing overcharges. Pool maintenance contracts 40% above market rate. Landscaping services costing triple comparable providers. Snow removal contracts for a Texas community that averages 1 snow day per decade. Every month, your HOA dues include inflated charges for substandard services. I continued over 3 years. This represents additional theft of approximately $200,000. Music. But the smoking gun was the email evidence. Maria had preserved Karen's electronic confession, and now it filled the gymnasium screen in 24-point font. Revised community amenity pricing, confidential, and profit-sharing arrangements for inflated amenity budgets. You could hear a pin drop. Residents were seeing, in Karen's own words, how she'd conspired to steal from the community she claimed to protect. This isn't a personality conflict, I said. This is documented financial fraud. That's when Karen's composure finally shattered. Against Haratarni's frantic head-shaking, she stood up and began defending herself. Those emails are taken out of context, she shouted. I negotiated the best deals I could for this community. If Dave Martinez wasn't so obsessed with destroying me because I enforced pool rules against his nephew, none of this would be an issue. The crowd stirred. She just admitted to targeting Miguel based on ethnicity, while simultaneously confirming the financial irregularities. I've devoted 3 years of my life to protecting property values and maintaining standards, Karen continued, her voice rising. If that means keeping certain elements from undermining what we've built here, then I make no apologies. The racist undertones were unmistakable now. Phones emerged throughout the crowd recording her meltdown. Miguel, sitting in the front row, shook his head in disgust while live streaming to his thousands of followers. Detective Chin chose that moment to address the crowd. The district attorney's office has filed criminal charges, including fraud, embezzlement, mail fraud, and conspiracy. This is now an active criminal investigation. Hiran's attorney physically restrained her from responding, but the damage was done. She'd publicly confessed to financial misconduct, while revealing the discriminatory motivations behind her harassment campaign. The community response was swift and overwhelming. Resident after resident stood to share their own stories of Karen's harassment, financial hardships caused by inflated HOA dues, families who'd moved away rather than endured her targeting. The Johnsons described receiving violation notices for suspicious gatherings when extended family visited for holidays. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman from across the street, delivered the kill shot. "In 60 years, I've never seen anyone work so hard to destroy the sense of community they claim to protect." The standing ovation when I finished our presentation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Not for me, for the truth finally being told and justice finally being served. "I didn't move to Willowbrook to be a lawyer again," I said when the crowd quieted. "I moved here to heal. But when someone tries to steal from my community and then harass families for asking questions, they picked the wrong retired construction attorney." The mic drop moment Karen had orchestrated, just not the way she'd planned. 6 months later, justice had a beautiful symmetry to it. Karen Mitchell pled guilty to federal fraud charges, agreeing to full restitution plus penalties in exchange for avoiding trial. The final tally: $847,000 in stolen funds, plus interest in legal fees. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and her husband quietly resigned from city council when his own involvement in the cover-up came to light. Sunset Construction faced federal investigation and lost all municipal contracts. 3 other communities discovered similar kickback schemes, turning our local drama into a statewide HOA reform movement. But the real victory was what we built from thesis of Karen's corruption. Our new HOA bylaws require transparent financial reporting, resident oversight committees, and independent audits. No more backroom deals or mysterious budget items. Every expenditure over $500, 0 cents, requires board approval with full community notification. Maria Santos was elected president. Jim Walsh continues as treasurer. And I served as compliance officer, a volunteer position that lets me channel my legal skills into community protection. The Recover Ed funds transformed Willowbrook from Karen's authoritarian thief into the collaborative community we'd all hoped for. We used $400,000.02 eliminate HOA dues for 3 years. Another $300,000 0 cents funded actual improvements, playground upgrades, walking trails, and the community garden that now produces vegetables for the local food bank. The remaining $147,000 established the Sarah Martinez Memorial, scholarship for local students pursuing engineering degrees. Miguel was the first recipient, and watching Haim accept that award with tears in his eyes reminded me why fighting for justice matters. Sarah would have loved seeing her memory help other young people reach their dreams. The personal healing surprised me most. Fighting Karen's corruption had given me purpose beyond grief, a way to channel 20 years of legal experience into protecting people rather than just winning cases. The community meetings that once felt like trials now focus on shared projects and genuine collaboration. Miguel spent his final summer weeks organizing pool parties for neighborhood kids, teaching them to swim and showing them that community spaces belong to everyone. The sound of children laughing in that pool, the same pool Karen had tried to weaponize, became the soundtrack of our victory. Our story spread beyond Willowbrook. Property law journals featured our case as a model for community organizing. State legislators cited our experience while drafting HOA reform bills. I started receiving calls from other communities experiencing similar corruption, and helping them felt like the best possible use of my retirement. The ripple effects continue expanding. Real estate agents now inform buyers about HOA financial oversight rights. Municipal codes require stricter oversight of community financial management. Most importantly, residents and developments across Texas know they have power when they organize around facts and law. Heron's harassment had been designed to isolate and intimidate, but it accomplished the opposite. Our community emerged stronger, more connected, and more vigilant about protecting each other from future abuse. The fear she'd cultivated was replaced by the confidence that comes from standing up to bullies and winning. Detective Chen told me, Our case became a training example for white-collar crime investigations. Most HOA fraud goes unreported because residents don't know their rights, she explained. Your documentation and presentation made prosecution straightforward. Last month, we held our first annual community pool party. Honoring Sarah's memory and celebrating our journey from authoritarian control to collaborative governance, families from across Willowbrook gathered around the pool that had sparked this entire conflict, sharing food, stories, and the satisfaction of justice served. Miguel, now thriving in his engineering program, visited for the celebration. "Uncle Dave," he said, as we watched neighbors laughing and swimming together, "Aunt Sarah would be so proud of what you built here. Hugh was right. We built something Sarah would have loved. A community based on fairness, transparency, and mutual respect, rather than fear and control." What's your worst HOA horror story? Share it in the comments. You might be surprised how many others have similar experiences, and more importantly, you might inspire someone else to stand up for their rights. Remember, you have more power than corrupt officials want you to know. Research your rights, document everything, and don't let anyone bully you out of transparency. Subscribe for more David versus Goliath stories, where everyday people take on corrupt systems and win. Next week, how a retired teacher exposed a municipal tax scam using nothing but public records and determination. Because sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be silent when you know what's art.